The grand ballroom was bathed in golden light, the hum of conversation rising and falling like a soft wave. Politicians, celebrities, and business moguls alike swirled through the crowd, glasses of champagne raised, their laughter filling the room. At the center of it all, a long table covered in exquisite flowers and silverware gleamed, and guests danced to the beat of a live orchestra. But beneath the glitz, an undercurrent of tension bubbled. Tonight wasn't going to be just another lavish affair. It was set to be a night of reckoning, where two forces would collide, and the world would be watching. On one side of the room stood Hunter Biden, the infamous son of a president, a man whose reputation had been marred by controversy and scandal. Known for his wit, charm, and occasional recklessness, Hunter had made a name for himself far beyond his family legacy. He was, however, not without his enemies, especially those from the other side of the political spectrum. And tonight, he had a target in mind: Barron Trump. Barron, the youngest son of the president, had always been somewhat of an enigma. Rarely in the public eye, he had grown into a quiet, reserved young man, far removed from the political drama his family often found themselves at the center of. He was poised, calculated, and had a maturity about him that belied his years. But even the most composed individuals have their breaking points, and Hunter knew this. The gala would be his stage, and Barron, in his eyes, was the perfect subject for his latest game. The air was thick with anticipation as Hunter made his way across the room, a devilish grin forming on his lips. He was prepared to provoke, to test Barron's composure in front of the glittering crowd. What Hunter didn't expect, however, was the storm that was about to break, the one that would shake the entire room and leave everyone breathless. Tonight, Barron Trump would show a side of himself the world had never seen before. It would be a moment none of them would ever forget. The calm and collected young man would rise to the occasion, but how he would do it, no one could have predicted. This was no ordinary gala. This was a confrontation that would go down in history. As the evening wore on, the room seemed to pulse with energy. The orchestra strings played softly in the background, and the golden chandeliers cast a soft, almost ethereal glow over the crowd. Every conversation buzzed with anticipation as the gala's most intriguing interaction loomed closer. It was undeniable. Everyone in the room knew something was about to unfold between Hunter Biden and Barron Trump. It was only a matter of time before the two locked eyes. Hunter had made his way around the room, casually engaging in conversations, but his mind was elsewhere. He kept stealing glances toward Barron, who was standing with a small group of friends, quietly observing the room. Barron seemed out of place, like a calm center in a storm. His composed, serene demeanor contrasted sharply with the high-energy atmosphere around him. The young Trump scion had never sought the limelight, preferring to remain in the background, a far cry from his siblings or father. But tonight, it was clear that Barron was the target. Hunter had been known for his sharp tongue and biting humor, but this wasn't just a playful jab. He wanted something more, a reaction. Something to break Barron's cool exterior. He knew Barron was a walking mystery. No one truly knew what made him tick, what would push him to snap. But Hunter was determined to find out. Finally, the moment came. The orchestra shifted to a more intense melody, and Hunter, sensing his opportunity, moved toward Barron. The young Trump stood with his back slightly turned, gazing at the crowd through the polished glass windows overlooking the night sky. As Hunter approached, Barron's posture remained unchanged. He was unfazed, as if aware of the storm about to descend. Hunter flashed a confident smile as he slid into Barron's line of sight. He made no effort to soften his approach, no warm greeting or polite introduction. Instead, his voice was sharp, cutting through the air. "So, Barron," Hunter began with a tone laced with mockery, "you're just standing there, in the middle of all this excitement, looking like you're in a different world. What's it like to be so detached from all this? I mean, do you even care about politics, or are you just here because you have to be?" Barron's eyes didn't even flicker. His expression was unreadable, his face a mask of calm. He didn't respond immediately, as if weighing the words. Hunter pressed on, eager to provoke. "Or maybe you just prefer being invisible," he continued, eyes gleaming. "It must be easy when you've got a father who's a president, but no one really expects you to say or do anything that matters. I guess the pressure must be overwhelming, huh?" The words stung, but Barron remained silent. He hadn't flinched, hadn't moved a muscle. For a moment, it seemed as though the room was holding its breath, waiting for the reaction that was surely coming. But then, Barron finally turned his head toward Hunter. His eyes locked with Hunter's, cool and unbothered, but with an intensity that spoke volumes. Hunter smirked, thinking he had won. He was about to launch into another round of jabs, but Barron cut him off with a simple, calm reply. "You know," Barron said, his voice smooth, almost casual, I've always found it interesting how people think they can know someone just by looking at them or making assumptions about their life. It's almost like you think you've figured me out. Like you can control the narrative by talking loud enough." Hunter raised an eyebrow. This was unexpected. Barron's words were calm, yet they carried a weight that left Hunter momentarily speechless. The crowd around them had begun to take notice, and the subtle buzz in the air was growing louder. "You think I'm detached?" Barron continued, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Maybe I'm just more focused than most people here. I'm not interested in playing the games others are playing. But that doesn't mean I don't have a mind of my own." There was a long pause. Hunter's grin began to fade, replaced with a mix of confusion and curiosity. The young man standing in front of him wasn't rattled, wasn't caught off guard by his insults. Barron Trump wasn't the child many people expected him to be. There was something more beneath the surface, something sharp, calculated, and undeniably powerful. Barron took a step forward, his voice dropping, his words carefully measured. "Here's the thing, Hunter. People like you think they can push others around because they've got the spotlight. But you forget that the real strength isn't in how loud you can get. It's in how you carry yourself, in the way you respond when things get tough. So, if you think you can get a reaction out of me by playing these games, you're wasting your time." Hunter felt the weight of Barron's words settling in, like a stone sinking to the bottom of a lake. He had expected Barron to snap, to react with anger or defensiveness. But instead, the young man had shown composure, something Hunter hadn't anticipated. Barron wasn't just an innocent bystander at this gala. He was someone who had control, someone who wasn't afraid to take the reins when it mattered most. As Barron turned his back and walked away, the room fell into a stunned silence. No one had expected the quiet, reserved young man to stand his ground like that, to turn the tables so effortlessly. But Barron Trump had done just that. His response had shocked the entire room, leaving a trail of whispers in his wake. It was clear. Barron wasn't just a passive participant in his family's story. He was a force to be reckoned with. The silence that followed Barron's words hung in the air like a storm cloud waiting to break. The entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath, watching the scene unfold with bated anticipation. Hunter, caught off guard by the unanticipated maturity and calm of Barron's response, stood frozen for a moment, his sharp tongue suddenly tied. The smirk that had been plastered on his face was gone, replaced by an almost palpable tension. Barron Trump, of all people, had just outmaneuvered him, and in front of an audience no less. The fact that Barron hadn't risen to the bait, the fact that he hadn't snapped, hadn't shown weakness, was something Hunter hadn't expected. As Barron walked away, his head held high, the murmurs from the crowd began to swell. Eyes darted between the two men, some faces still in shock, others whispering among themselves. It was clear, this wasn't just a minor skirmish. This was something more. Hunter was rattled, the effects of Barron's calm and collected response lingering in his mind. For a moment, it seemed as though the night might slip back into its usual rhythm. But then, something unexpected happened. Hunter, never one to retreat from a challenge, found himself moving once again through the crowd, this time with a new purpose. His earlier bravado was gone, replaced by something darker, more dangerous. The game had shifted, and Hunter was determined to regain control. He could feel the eyes of the room on him as he moved toward Barron, who was now standing by the balcony, gazing out at the shimmering lights of the city below. "Barron," Hunter called, his voice cutting through the air, but this time there was no jest, no humor. His words were heavy, laced with a challenge. Barron didn't flinch. He didn't even turn around immediately. Instead, he continued to look out at the view, as if the entire situation was beneath him. It was a deliberate move, one that conveyed both power and indifference. Barron Trump wasn't playing by the same rules as everyone else, and Hunter knew it. But Hunter wasn't about to let this slip away. "You really think you can walk away from this?" Hunter pressed, his tone sharp now, like a knife. "You think you've won just by saying a few words? Let's see how you handle the pressure when the spotlight's on you. You think you're some untouchable figure, but I'm not finished with you." The crowd watched with eager eyes as the standoff between the two men reached its peak. The orchestra's music seemed to fade into the background, replaced by the tense silence of the room. Everyone was waiting for the eruption, waiting for Barron to crack, for him to show weakness, for him to finally lose his composure. But Barron didn't crack. He didn't even flinch. Without turning around, Barron spoke, his voice low, calm, yet somehow cutting through the tension like a blade. "It's funny," he said, his words deliberate, each one chosen carefully. "You're trying so hard to provoke me, Hunter. But what you don't understand is that your words don't matter. You think you're winning because you can talk the loudest, but real strength isn't about being heard, it's about knowing when to say nothing." The room held its collective breath. Barron's words were slow, measured, but there was something deeply powerful in them. He wasn't playing Hunter's game. He wasn't engaging with the drama, the noise. And that, in itself, was the most powerful weapon of all. Hunter's jaw tightened as he realized Barron wasn't going to bite. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. This wasn't a game he could win with just words. He was outmatched, outclassed by someone who refused to stoop to his level. But still, Hunter wasn't ready to concede. There was a part of him that couldn't accept that Barron had gotten the last word. His mind raced, but Barron wasn't giving him an opening, wasn't offering any vulnerability. It was as though Barron had been waiting for this moment his entire life, preparing for this very confrontation. He was unfazed, unshaken, and in that moment, he was more powerful than any insult could make him. The crowd began to murmur again, some whispering in awe, others shocked into silence. No one had expected Barron to rise to the occasion in such a way. What had started as a moment of possible humiliation for him had transformed into a scene of strength, grace, and quiet defiance. Barron Trump had proven, without raising his voice, without breaking his composure, that he was not someone to be toyed with. He had shown the world exactly who he was, and, more importantly, who he would become. As Barron turned and walked away from the balcony, the atmosphere in the room shifted once again. The air was thick with admiration, awe, and, for some, a hint of fear. Barron had not only deflected Hunter's jabs, he had disarmed him, leaving him standing alone in the middle of the room, powerless. It was a stunning victory, one that no one would soon forget. Hunter watched as Barron disappeared into the crowd, the young man's figure retreating into the shadows of the ballroom. And for the first time that night, the infamous Biden smirk faltered, replaced by a look of silent realization. Barron Trump hadn't just held his ground, he had owned the room. The power had shifted, and Hunter was left with nothing but the bitter taste of defeat. It wasn't just the gala that had changed that night, it was the way the world saw Barron Trump. He was no longer the quiet, reserved son of a president. He was a force in his own right. A man to be respected. A man who had shown that true strength wasn't in the noise, it was in the silence before the storm. The room was still humming with energy, but something had undeniably shifted. The once celebratory atmosphere of the gala had been replaced with a profound sense of reflection. As the crowd slowly dispersed, their conversations were no longer about the gowns, the speeches, or the extravagant display of wealth. It was about the unexpected confrontation they had just witnessed. Barron Trump had left an indelible mark that night, not through arrogance, not through power, but through his simple, quiet composure. A composure that had made all the difference. Hunter Biden, who had come into the night as the provocateur, the loud voice in the room, was now a man who seemed to have lost something. His charm, his wit, and his brashness had failed him in a way he hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just that Barron had held his ground, it was that Barron had shown him, and everyone else, that true power doesn't always come from the loudest voice, but from the stillness of self-control. As the evening wore on, Hunter retreated into the shadows, perhaps more uncertain than he'd ever been before. In contrast, Barron, though still a quiet figure in the corner, was now seen through a different lens. It wasn't just his last name that commanded attention. It was his ability to rise above the noise, to remain unfazed in the face of provocation, and to hold his ground with dignity. Barron Trump had taught the crowd something important that night, that silence could be more powerful than words. For anyone watching, the message was clear. Strength doesn't need to shout to be heard. Sometimes, it's the quietest voices, the ones that don't engage in the drama, the ones that stay calm and centered, that have the most influence. In a world where everyone is vying for attention, it's easy to forget that true power lies in knowing when to speak, and when to remain silent. Barron Trump had proven that tonight, and in doing so, he had not only silenced his critics but had shown them a glimpse of his future. One that would be defined by resilience, patience, and quiet authority. The crowd dispersed, but the legacy of that night would live on. Barron Trump, the young man who once seemed invisible, had made himself unforgettable. And as for Hunter Biden, he would no longer be the one to challenge others with words. The battle had been won not through force, but through grace. And in the end, it was Barron's grace that had emerged victorious, reminding everyone in the room, and anyone who heard the story, that sometimes, the best way to win a battle is to never let the battle consume you. As the gala came to a close, and the last of the champagne flutes were emptied, one thing was certain: Barron Trump had not just shown his strength, he had inspired a room full of people to rethink what true strength really means. And that, perhaps, was the greatest victory of all. So, as you go forward in your own life, remember Barron's lesson: you don't have to be loud to be powerful. You don't have to react to every provocation. Sometimes, the most powerful response is no response at all. And with that, you can walk with your head held high, knowing that true strength comes from within.